Thanks for the invitation to speak to you today. As Leslie said, I'm the manager of the Solitary Islands Marine Park. I moved to the area in 2000 and that was for a job with Marine Parks Authority. So I've been working with the Marine Parks Authority for about 12 years now, and 7 years of that as the manager. So I've had a great decade or so working on all things marine in this area. I was asked to come along today to talk about the management of the Solitary Islands Marine Park. So what I'll cover in my talk, in my 30 minutes, is a brief history of New South Wales marine protected areas. Then I'll look at the Solitary Islands Marine Park itself, and then the recommendations from the independent scientific audit of marine parks in New South Wales. So just a reminder, what are marine protected areas and why we have them. A clearly defined geographical space, recognised, dedicated and managed through legal or other effective means to achieve the long-term conservation of nature with associated ecosystem services and cultural values. So it's just setting the scene for probably all of the discussions today. And some key points to remember when we're managing these areas. We're managing a wide range of human activities. We don't operate in isolation, so we operate alongside fisheries, catchment management, pollution reduction programs, etc., to achieve marine conservation ultimately. Marine protected areas provide scientific reference points to better understand the marine environment and human impacts upon it, provides for needs of threatened species as components of biodiversity, and in this area in particular, the grey nurse shark and black cod. Protected areas of high conservation value are also feature in this marine park, as they do in other marine parks, particularly North Solitary Island and Fish Soup, and provide for recreational opportunities, enjoyment and appreciation. So thinking big picture, we have some international and national obligations. So the policy and legislative basis for marine parks in New South Wales. There's internationally conventions that then sort of set the scene for what we try to achieve nationally and at the state level. Something that people may be familiar with is the Australian National Representative System of Marine Protected Areas that provides a comprehensive, adequate and representative system. And I have a slide coming up shortly that highlights the bioregions around Australia in which we look to represent marine habitats in each of those bioregions. And that sort of feeds down into the state level of developing a representative system in New South Wales and looking at the bioregions in New South Wales, and again protecting the range of habitats within those bioregions. Of course, there's the legislation that we're bound by, the Marine Parks Act and regulations. Fisheries Management Act also play a strong part in the management of marine protected areas, and also the National Parks and Wildlife Act. And there are other acts and regulations that do influence what we do day to day. So as I mentioned, this is the IMCRA bioregions that were announced with the National Representative System of Marine Protected Areas. So you have these bioregions around Australia that are, generally speaking, biologically similar. Solitary Islands Marine Park is in the Tweed-Moreton bioregion. And we also have the Manning bioregion, Hawkesbury, Batemans and Twofold in New South Wales as well. So in New South Wales, there are 6 parks covering a third of New South Wales waters, established between 1998 and 2007. And the objectives primarily are to conserve biodiversity, habitats and ecological processes while providing opportunities for ecologically sustainable use, appreciation, enjoyment and understanding. There's also 12 aquatic reserves in New South Wales waters, covering approximately 2,000 hectares, so smaller in size, 10 around the Sydney area, and then one at Cook Island and one on the south coast as well, with the objective to conserve biodiversity of fish and marine vegetation. And there's also actually 62 national parks and nature reserves that contain a marine component as well, along 40% of the coastline, with the objective of protecting the headwaters of coastal rivers, estuaries and their wetlands, marine habitats and shoreline catchment lands. So there's several tools or systems in place to protect the marine and coastal environment in New South Wales. So this is a zoom in on the New South Wales coast. We have the same 6 marine parks as I mentioned. So Cape Byron and Solitaries are in the Tweed-Moreton bioregion in the north of the state. We have the Manning Shelf bioregion in which Port Stephens Great Lakes is situated. In the Hawkesbury Shelf bioregion, that's where we have the 10 aquatic reserves. Jervis Bay Marine Park and Bateman's Marine Park are in the Bateman's Shelf bioregion, and the the Twofold Shelf bioregion is in the very south of New South Wales and extends into Victorian waters. And we also have the Lord Howe Island province, in which Lord Howe Island Marine Park is situated. And that goes some way to representing the different habitat types within each of the bioregions in New South Wales, which then, as I was mentioning, leads into the national representative system of representing habitats nationally in that system. So key management tools in managing marine parks in New South Wales, we have a zoning plan, and we have the 4 zones that can be applied in New South Wales. So sanctuary zones being the highest level of protection. So there's the removal of any plants or animals is prohibited. We have habitat protection zones, so conserving biodiversity by reducing some activities, but line fishing and collecting can still occur. We have the general use zones, which is, as it sounds, provides for a wide range of general activities, and special purpose zones, which allow for the management of special areas such as cultural heritage, boating facilities. In the Solitary Islands, we have 4 special purpose zones, 2 provide for ongoing aquaculture in rivers and 2 for Aboriginal use as well as rehabilitation in 2 key areas. And aside from the 4 zones that we can apply in a marine park, we also can regulate particular activities, and that could mean restrictions on gear or use in a particular area that's separate to zoning. And we also have the ability to provide permits and conditions on permits for particular activities within a marine park. For example, if a commercial tour operator, they're required to have a permit in the park, and we can apply conditions on their activities or on an event or a competition, etc. The actual management structure of marine parks in New South Wales, we have 2 ministers. So we have the Minister for Primary Industries and the Minister for Environment. The Marine Parks Authority themselves, made up of 3 heads of department. So we have the Director General, Premiers and Cabinet, who's the Chair. We have the Director General, Primary Industries, and the Chief Executive of Office of Environment and Heritage. We also have a Marine Parks Advisory Council, who are made up of key stakeholders throughout the state that come together and meet and discuss and advise the authority on areas of interest to their stakeholders. And then that's replicated at each park, and we have a Marine Parks Advisory Committee at each park where we have those stakeholders representing their interests coming together and providing advice on marine protected areas throughout or in their region. As I mentioned, I've talked about the legislation, zoning plans, which I mentioned is a key tool for us managing marine protected areas, and operational plans. They often get forgotten, but they are a legislative requirement, and they guide the strategies and actions to support zoning and guides our work program day to day. So moving into the actual Solitary Islands Marine Park, just how we manage the SIMP on a day-to-day basis. The Solitary Islands it was established in 1991 as a marine reserve, so the boundaries of the park have been in place since 1991. The Marine Parks Act was then introduced in 1997. Previously it was managed under I think it was Fisheries and Oyster Farms Act, and then Fisheries Management Act. It then became a marine park in 1998. And then the management of the park has been under that Marine Parks Act since then. So it's 71,000 hectares of marine and estuarine environment. So it extends from the mean high water mark out to the 3 nautical mile state boundary and includes bubbling around the islands as well, so 3 nautical miles from North Solitary, South Solitary, etc. It extends up the estuaries to their tidal limits, includes the 5 major islands in the park. And as you can see on the map, it's adjacent to National Park, Urugee National Park, for for the northern extent of the marine park. So the southern boundary is at Coffs Harbour, at the most easterly aspect of Muttonbird Island, and it's about 75 kilometres up the coast to Plover Island at the Sandon River. One of the key features of the area is the influence of the East Australian current mixing with the cooler currents from the south, and that's why we get this amazing mix of marine plants and animals, and this tropical and temperate influences. It's where we have the sort of the mixing of these, the warm and cool currents, to provide this amazing biodiversity. We also have the adjacent Commonwealth Marine Reserve, which you can see on the map. It's to the east of the 3 nautical mile boundary, and it follows the 50-metre depth contour as well. So we manage that on behalf of the Commonwealth. So in total, that's 90,000 hectares combined. So some of the key natural and cultural values, as I mentioned, the important oceanographic influences. So we have this slide here. It highlights the East Australian current coming down the coast. This is most likely in a warmer period, possibly summer, and we do get the cooler waters mixing in at that one area at Coffs Harbour. We do also get upwelling off the shelf as well. So that's why we're fortunate to have some species at the northern extent or southern extent of their range, all in this one location. We have varied habitat types in the park. There's quite a bit of reef in the park, which I'll show on a slide coming up. So that really supports the different assemblages as well. The park supports endemic, protected and endangered species, such as we've got the grey nose shark, black cod, and the broad-banded anemone fish. So that's one of the anemone species that really isn't found elsewhere, so it's a really important location is in this region. It's also an area of very important cultural significance to the Aboriginal people, as Mark suggested, and there's also significant maritime history in this area. So some specific natural values. There's over 550 species of reef fish within 90 families. When the research program commenced in about 2001 within the Solitary Islands, within the Marine Parks Authority, there was about 280 species recorded at that time. So we've moved on, a lot more research. There's now 550 species documented. Wrasse are the most species-rich family. The highest reef diversity is at North Solitary Island, as well as coral diversity. Over 600 species of molluscs identified, 91 species of hard coral recorded, and many people don't even realise that we have coral in the park. We've got some of the most pristine estuaries in New South Wales, and all 7 species of mangroves found in New South Wales are found in some of our northern estuaries. So it's quite a diverse area. And I won't spend too much time on this slide because I think Steve's going to talk in a bit of detail about this later, but it's just highlighting that we've got this extensive amount of reef throughout the park. You can see some areas that it's some of the old mapping based on navigation charts and other information. Then we have this ability to now get some really fine-scale mapping, and using a swath mapper, more up-to-date technology, and you're getting such detailed pictures of the seafloor as well. So that's really informing management in the past 5 years or so. And as I mentioned, we look to protect the different habitat types in the park, so it's important we know the range of habitat types and ecosystems within the area. So this mapping certainly helps. And just to highlight some of the differences in, and even just the reef habitat itself, research is indicating offshore reef, mid-shelf reef and inshore reef are quite different, and just some of the pictures can highlight that. So the offshore reef and deep and intermediate reef is comprised of mixed sponge gardens, sessile, filter feeders, ascidians, etc. Whereas your mid-shelf reefs, predominantly coral, some anemones, kelp, boulder, algae, whereas inshore are predominantly macroalgae, etc. And the fish assemblages inshore to offshore are influenced by those different habitat types. So some key program areas within the park and how we manage day to day. We do have a research and monitoring program. We've got one research officer who's involved in a whole swag of different research and works very closely with the Marine Science Centre and other institutions to in all aspects of management and research. Key programs that we lead, the reef fish monitoring program, so looking at reef fish biodiversity as well as the effects of sanctuary zones. Also the benthic monitoring program, so that's videoing the seafloor to look at percent cover of different communities. Habitat mapping, which I mentioned, is really important, particularly for future management of the park. And now that we have this amazing technology, it's becoming even more so important. We also have the ability to undertake baited video, and we now have stereo baited video using 2 cameras. Steve might go into detail about those. Mud crab surveys, black cod surveys, we have temperature loggers throughout the park, grey nurse shark listening stations, and I believe in a couple of months there's an automated underwater vehicle visiting the coast to get some really amazing footage and information from the seafloor. So this is just an example of the swath mapping. This is a reef called 40 Acres, and it highlights the detail that you can get from the swath mapper and the profile of the reef, etc. The gutters become obvious, so you can see it's a really important tool. Another key program area is education. It's very important that we communicate the information that we have about the research and the importance and the values of the park. We have an education officer, Ellie. One of her key jobs within that program area is to deliver the school program. And there's CDs out the front. There's a primary school education kit has been developed, and she works very closely with Mark actually on one of the tours at the Arrawarra stone fish traps, among other excursions. So many things that our education officer is involved in: the Marine Discovery Series in conjunction with the Marine Science Centre, art competitions, tours during holiday periods, developing signs, posters, etc., attendance at expos. So she's very busy. Just a few photos of Ellie at work or other education officers over the time having a bit of a chat to the public. I see Bob Palmer having a chat to Sam. Yeah. We have a compliance program. We have 2 marine park officers who undertake a role similar to the fisheries officers. They undertake the high profile patrols throughout the park. We have the marine park vessel. There's also covert patrol, so if they're gathering information and they might follow up on information of illegal mud crabbing in a sanctuary zone in a river, so that might require some covert patrols to follow up on that. Provision of advisory material, so we're not there to really just go out and get infringement notices. We would rather provide people with the information to ensure they do the right thing. So a key aspect of their job is providing information to the public. Lots of interagency operations, so we work closely with Water Police, the fisheries officers and the National Parks and Wildlife Service rangers. They also have a key role in the whale disentanglement and stranding training in the area and provide the vessels for that work. And we also undertake patrols in the Commonwealth waters, the Marine Reserve, on behalf of the Commonwealth under an annual business agreement. So some of the key issues that we deal with could be a collection of molluscs over and above the bag and size limits of some of the rocky shores. Could be line fishing in sanctuary zones or anchoring in sanctuary zones, some illegal crab trapping, some seasonal inshore lobster monitoring to ensure the traps are adequately marked, etc., or not in sanctuary zone. And again, just some photos of the officers at work over the years. We also install and maintain infrastructure in the park. So That's installing signage in appropriate places and maintaining them, giving the right information, at all of the boat ramps. Also having the zone markers offshore, the yellow zone markers to indicate where the sanctuary zones are. A series of moorings throughout the park as well to provide for access primarily around the islands. So it's quite a job in itself managing contractors to do the moorings or to actually install and maintain signs ourselves. Another key program area is environmental assessment. So this is working with council or other agencies to ensure that what happens on land has the most minimal impact on the marine park as possible. So we only have an advice role. We provide advice for any impacts or potential impacts above the mean high water mark. And we work closely with such agencies. We're involved quite heavily in the Pacific Highway upgrade and attend regular site visits to ensure that the controls put in place are adequate to ensure that the marine park's not impacted. This role also contributes to the estuary management plans and other planning tools, comment on development applications, etc., monitoring of sediment and pollution control and some water quality monitoring as well. And permits, as I mentioned, we have an ability to put conditions on permits to ensure that activities are conducted in a sustainable manner. Permits are required for commercial activities such as dive charters, fishing charters, competitions, events, some film and photography and research, and also for some activities in Commonwealth waters, which I believe is being reviewed at the moment. And sort of the final program area that I'll mention is the planning and management through time, and that'll lead into the independent audit as well. So as I mentioned, the marine park was initially a marine reserve, and the boundary in place is as we have today, but the zone plan within that was quite different. So that was declared in May 91, so we're actually 21 years old. And I highlighted that the reserve became the park in 1998. And the boundaries stayed the same, the outer boundaries. So over the years, we developed a zoning plan. Between 98 and 2002, there was community surveys, issues and options papers, a draft zoning plan, an operational plan, a revised draft, zoning plan, etc. And then we came up with the zone plan that we have in place today, and that was in place for 5 years, and then we were bound by legislation to review that after 5 years. So we embarked on that process, and between 2008 to 2011, we went through a process of identifying issues with the community, putting out a draft zoning plan, compiling all that information and finalising a zoning plan in March 2011. And then, as you're probably aware, the new government came in and rescinded that zoning plan. So what we have in place today is the one that's been in place since 2002. So we're back to the zoning plan that's been around for some time. The government also introduced a moratorium on zoning plan reviews and alteration of sanctuary zones, and that's as it stands today. So the independent scientific audit of marine parks, the government has committed to a marine parks policy that finds the right balance between protecting the marine environment and allowing recreational fishing, is evidence-based and proven to deliver tangible results, and listens to concerns and gives local people a proper say in decisions that affect their community. In June 2011, the independent scientific audit was commissioned to inform future government policy, and a six-member panel was brought together, expertise in fisheries science, marine biodiversity conservation and social and economic evaluation, and they were appointed by ministers. They've been very independent. We haven't really had a lot to do with them other than, we've met with them as other stakeholder groups have met with them. So other than that, they've been extremely independent of marine parks or the Marine Parks Authority. There was a terms of reference. Given the time, I won't go through the terms of reference in detail. and the audit process. So they met 11 times, considered 200 submissions along with departmental data and information, conducted 25 workshops with stakeholders, scientists and departmental staff. All of that information is on the website, the Marine Parks Audit website. The Minister released the audit report on 16 February and it's got quite a list of recommendations to the ministers. They have invited submissions to the report and the recommendations, which has now closed, so 30th of June that closed. And ministers have indicated that the government stands by the current moratorium and will respond to the report in due course. I've got 2 slides. 2 principal or overarching recommendations, the governance of the New South Wales Marine Estate to be reorganised by bringing the entire state under one legislative and administrative structure, closely aligned with the 5 catchment management authorities in New South Wales. And also the signs for the Marine Estate to be reorganised under an independent scientific committee as well, which we could possibly talk further about later. As I mentioned, several other recommendations identifying potential improvements to governance, etc., future social, economic, ecological research, and potential for legislative review and rationalisation. So responding to the audit recommends and foreshadows a significant body of work, including delivering better, more integrated management of a marine estate and improving marine park management and decision making, including to better incorporate social and economic considerations, to identify and manage threats, along with improved approaches to zoning and public participation. So the next steps, apparently there were over 100 submissions received on the report and the recommendations, and I believe an executive steering committee, including the Department of Premier and Cabinet and New South Wales Trade and Investment, Primary Industries, and Office of Environment and Heritage are considering the submissions and providing advice on the report to inform the government response. So that's the management and where we're at the moment.